And okay, so welcome to the webinar. My name is Rolfe of Mentoring Works, and today's webinar is all about questions, because I believe that great mentors ask more questions than they answer. In fact, great mentors are slow to give advice. Mentors do not withhold their wisdom, but they will draw out their mentees' own ideas first. The mantra for mentors could be: ask before you tell, listen before you speak. So my aim is, as always, to make mentoring easier, more enjoyable and more effective. So in this webinar, we'll be exploring why questions are so critical, the key questions in a mentoring conversation, what more you can do with questions, and a little bit about the art of asking. You know, it's not what you say sometimes, but the way that you say it. So 4 parts to our webinar today. Along the way, I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of positive psychology and appreciative inquiry, and how we can use them to make mentoring, or to take mentoring to a higher level. Please excuse me, I'm going to go over a cough and cold. So let's talk about why questions are so critical. And the first question, I'm actually going to ask you a question, and you can jot your response down in the chat box, or jot it down for yourself. If you don't want to share it, that's fine. I want to ask you, so what is really our intention with mentoring? I realise that each of us, if we're operating within a mentoring program, there's going to be some overarching aims and objectives. Or if you're doing kind of a one-on-one informal, there'll nevertheless be some aims that you have. But I'm thinking from a philosophical point of view. What is our intention? What do we hope to really achieve? What's the vision or mission generally of mentors? So if you want to, okay, so I'm seeing some responses, and by the way, you can send a direct message to me if you prefer to be anonymous. I'll still read it out, but won't mention your name. So I'm seeing some responses coming in. So we've got, I want to see that individual grow. Brenda says guiding and getting mentee to make good decisions. Monica says holistic approach. Excellent. So we've got some ideas here. And, you know, if you were on the last webinar that I ran, it was called Listen Well, you're probably becoming familiar with my thoughts on contemporary mentoring and the role of the mentor. So it's, in my opinion, it's not simply stating your opinion or sharing your knowledge and experience, but rather, I mean, that is a part of what you do as a mentor, but it's not the first thing you do. Rather, I'd suggest the first thing you do is what I call in this model, the mentoring dynamic, is elicit. I call it the mentoring dynamic because in your mentoring relationship and in your conversations, you're going to move. You're not just doing one thing, and you're not moving lockstep, step 1, step 2, step 3. You're going back and forth. You're responding. It's interactive. It's a dialogue. There are 2 of you exchanging your words and your ideas. And I suggest the starting place is the mentor asking questions. Okay, and I'm seeing some other responses to the earlier question. What's our intention? Helping others explore other perspectives, pass on skills, helping and guiding others through the decision-making process objectively. And may I suggest that one of the ways you can do that really effectively, especially who was it who said exploring other perspectives, is by Roberto, thank you, is to ask questions that make them think, that allows them to explore. And Ron is saying, intention to help those who ask assist in decisions that they are making. Julie said, helping them to achieve their goals. Thank you for those responses. So you're familiar with this model of mentoring dynamic by now. If you've been on a few of my webinars, you will have seen it. It also talks about we support our mentee, we encourage, we validate their thinking, and we also challenge them. But before we challenge that thinking by providing a different perspective, we need to earn that right. And sometimes we can prompt them to come up with their own different perspective, merely by asking those questions that cause them to really think things through. So So some of you gave your responses to that question, what is our intention with mentoring? And I really think it's about empowerment, self-awareness, and realizing potential. And as I share my philosophy of mentoring with you, think about how it fits with yours. I don't expect you to, just follow mine willy-nilly or blindly, but I'm hoping we can find places where it fits, where it meshes with your philosophy. And I'll ask you for your comments as we go through here today. So my approach was really inspired by positive psychology. And you may be aware its emergence at the end of the 20th century expanded the focus of psychology from illness and dysfunction towards well-lived, meaningful and fulfilling lives. It heralded a new era for scientific study and practical applications of psychology for ordinary people. Martin Seligman kind of took the philosophy, if we can improve the lives of people who are below par in terms of their wellness and their well-being, if we can do that, and we've got proven methods that do it, what can we do for ordinary people? What more can ordinary people achieve in their own psychology to have these well-lived, meaningful and fulfilling lives? So initiators like Martin Seligman, and there's my well-thumbed and copy of the classic book, Learned Optimism. This should be on your shelf. Or better still, it should be as well thumbed and marked up as mine is. It is a classic and well worth the investment. There were other people like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who taught us about flow, and Donald Clifton, who talked about, well, what if instead of looking at what's wrong with people, we focused on what's right? He's the father, if you like, of the strengths-based development movement. And according to positive psychology, individuals are decision makers with choices and preferences and the possibility of becoming masterful in their lives. So as mentors, we can empower people by helping them to see options, make choices, and take responsibility for their decisions. And we move mentoring to a higher level when we recognize that adults are masters of their own destiny and they predict the future by what they do now. What you do today predicts, to a large extent, what results tomorrow. So answering your questions, the questions that you ask, enables your mentees to think, to create, to decide, to grow, and to change in positive ways of their own choosing. In this way, mentors choose to see an ancient wisdom. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, it's a fire to be kindled. So let's talk about questions that are the foundation of the mentoring conversation. I'll keep this brief because you've seen these on my previous webinars, or if you've looked in any of my books, you have seen this before. But just in case any of you are new to this information, I'll run through it fairly quickly. So the key questions in a mentoring conversation, there are 4. These are the fundamentals. These are the foundation. These are not the questions that necessarily come out of your mouth. These are the questions you hold in your mind like a framework. And the questions you do ask will be a variation, your own appropriate variation on one of these questions. So in a mentoring conversation, we want people to reflect on experience, make informed decisions, plan, and implement action. So at the heart of this mentoring conversation are the 4 key questions. Question number 1 is, where are you now? We're trying to find out, get them to reflect on their experience, the current situation, what is going on for them at the moment, what's on their mind, what's on their agenda, what's going on in their environment. And you want the mentee to talk about themselves and their experience. You literally want to find out where they're coming from in terms of their values and priorities. So what you're listening here, apart from the content of what they say, it might be unsaid. You might have to read between the lines. You might have to check in with them regularly, but you're looking for, what are their values? What's important to them? What are their priorities? What are their needs? What are their wants? And your questions help them think. Question number 2, where do you want to be? Someone said earlier their intention was to help them achieve their goals. So this is a question around goals. This is getting their vision, their possibilities out. What is it they actually want? And you invite them to create possibilities and alternatives, not just one goal, but get them really thinking. The more alternatives people have, the more options they have, the more empowered they are, because then they have choices, and choices equal power. Question number 3 then is, how might you get there? And this is, once you kind of narrowed it down, they've got clear on what the direction they're heading in, what it is they want, then it's time for some action planning. Now, this logically may not happen in one conversation. This is could be a series of conversations over time. And remember, mentoring is dynamic, so you will go backwards and forwards. You will adapt and change as circumstances and your mentee requires. The 4th question is definitely after a period of time, when they've made an action plan, they've put it into place, they've actually taken some action or not. And that's another question, another conversation. It's something like, how are you doing? You know, this is an Australianism. We say to people, oh, hi, how you doing? You might have a different phrase, but it will be a variation. It's a follow-up. It's an introduction to the review process, where you talk about what they've done or what they haven't done and how it went. And, you know, you reinforce the positive and help them adapt anything that didn't go so well. Okay. And I want to focus, excuse me, these questions that we're talking about, I really want to focus on that first question, because as mentors, it's highly likely you're pretty good at leading conversations about goal setting and action planning. But I want to encourage you to use more questions in the early stages to build up their self-awareness, because we know when people are more self-aware, we're kind of bringing things from the back of their mind and the below the surface kind of things. We're bringing it to front of mind, out in the open. You know, when we have an epiphany or an aha, it's something that was usually within us. It's just kind of burst out to the surface. And sometimes we take a little time to come to grips with that. But as we develop more self-awareness, we can gain more confidence. We can become more creative. And that means we make sounder decisions, and we can build stronger relationships. We have more effective communication, and actually the research says more promotions and more satisfaction at work. And in fact, people with more self-awareness are more likely to move into leadership roles. So to develop our understanding of where we are now and to increase their self-awareness, we want to use questions. And I'm looking for your examples now. I'd love to kind of workshop this a little bit. So I know we've got many experienced mentors on the line. Perhaps if you can share in the chat box. I'm looking for examples now to explore. What sort of questions do you ask when you're trying to explore people's strengths, when you're asking them about their past successes, when you're getting them to talk about what brings them joy and energy? You know, when you see the person's face light up, you know something's, you know, the light bulb's gone on there. So what's that about? What is that heartfelt passion that they have? These things are really important as they plan. And of course, as I mentioned before, values. You're trying to find this out. So love to see some examples coming through the chat. If you don't want to share them, fine, at least write them down for yourself. I'm interested in building up your personal repertoire at this point. And so that you have more in your toolkit, more ideas. Of course, any questions you see from others, including me, you need to kind of remold into your own vocabulary, restate or revise in the words that are appropriate for the particular person that you're mentoring, you know, trying to have that common language with them. Okay, so, and Ron is saying asking why questions is often helps. Yeah, we want to find out why. And sometimes we even rephrase the why. We might say, what is it about that that's important to you? It depends on the person. Some people can get quite defensive if you ask them why, and that kind of closes them down rather than opens them up. But that's certainly what we're trying to find out. Why is this important to you? Again, a lot depends on your art and your skill and the way you ask that question. So Celia is saying, what situations bring out the best from you? Yeah, and try to get examples. You know, a lot of people are really reluctant to talk about their success and reluctant to talk about their strengths. And in some cultures, that is more of a problem than others, because people are taught from an early age to be humble, not to kind of big note themselves and that sort of thing, not to be boastful, which might be good traits and culturally the norm. But in mentoring, we want them, and we can put it right out there and say, you know, I really want to hear about your successes. The more we look at what your strengths are in the privacy of this conversation, the more we will be able to, and you will be able to identify those strengths that you can use in your future. By looking at your past successes, you can look at how you did things then that worked out well and become stronger in using those strategies when they're appropriate in the future. So be quite open and blatant about the fact you want to hear about their successes. You may occasionally find someone who's overly boastful. You'll deal with that, but most people are far too modest. Sue saying, tell me about a time you experienced success. Now, that's a beautiful phrase, and it gives people an out. They're not saying, oh, I'm so successful. It asks them to say they experienced success with this. Thank you, Sue. That's beautiful. And the tell me about a time is a really good phrase to get them used to, because when people go for job interviews, that is a classic experiential interview question. So they want to be able to be practiced in answering that question by telling a succinct, to the point, relevant anecdote about their experience and the skills that they exhibited. Okay, Michael's saying, what are action or results that you are proud of? And what do you take pride in? Yes. And again, be aware that, some people might have a bit of a resistance. We should not be too prideful. But the fact is, we should take, in my opinion, I shouldn't say it's a fact, in my opinion, most of us need to take more pride in our achievements. And often your mentees will need prompting to do that. But you need to make it okay for them, at least, again, in the privacy of your conversation, to be explicit about what they've done well. And you can be very honest with them and say, we learn as much from the things we do well so that we can repeat them in the future as we do looking back at things we would rather have done differently. Now, it's valuable to look and learn at things we might call a mistake. And sometimes we do need to do that. But I think too many of us spend too much time beating ourselves up about things we've not done so well. Acknowledge them, learn from them, move on. And if that is ever a topic of conversation, may I suggest end on a positive. Get them focusing on the learning from things that really went well. As Michael said, the action or result that you are proud of. Heather is saying, when is the last time you experienced happiness and joy in your work? Tell me that story. What a lovely way to put that. When is the last time you experienced happiness and joy in your work? Tell me that story. Beautiful. Gloria says, what is a win for you? And you can see from all these responses that you will choose the phrasing that sits comfortably with you and falls comfortably with your mentee. You will adapt your language to the person you are working with. I'm not saying dumb it down. I'm just saying speak their language. And I'm also not saying don't try to be all hip and cool when you're with the young people. Be yourself, be authentic. And at the same time, try and find the middle ground. Okay, so Jess is saying, what do you think, brackets, name of other significant person in your life, would say that you do well and what they appreciate about you? Now, that's a great question too, because for people who are reluctant to speak up on their own behalf about what they're good at or what they're proud of, etc., take the burden off them. What do you think such and such a person would say, whether it's your boss or your friend or your colleagues? What would they say that you do well and that they appreciate about you? That's lovely. Thanks, Jess. And Michael is saying, what got you there? So they've mentioned or something about something they've achieved, and you can simply ask the question, well, what got you there? And you keep probing that and drawing it. Remember, the top of the mentoring dynamic, I call it elicit, and that means you are drawing them out. You are asking questions, you are listening, you are using all that non-verbal behavior that encourages people to keep talking, those short little questions, tell me more, etc., to get people to talk. This is lovely. Thanks for all your input. John is saying, succeeding through reflecting on one's success. Yes. Josephine says, what makes you happy at work? Lovely. All right. So let's move on. I want to talk about some more you can do with questions. And these sorts of questions I'm going to share with you are what's known as appreciative inquiry. I'll give you the reference in just a moment. If you're not familiar with it, it's, again, really worthwhile you're looking into this. There's great research. There's several good books focusing, and you'll find information on the internet about appreciative inquiry. Again, it's based on positive psychology. And these are the questions that assist people to appreciate the positive aspects of themselves. their experience and their abilities, and use them to explore aspirations and opportunities for their future. And the reason I talk about this is this really represents a shift. And, you know, I subtitled my book on advanced mentoring skills, taking your conversations to the next level. And that's what I'm on about here. I'm on about this shift, this higher level. Yeah, mentoring is great for problem solving and dealing with issues and problems and challenges. And there's a fantastic opportunity to move it to positive change. You know, and positive psychology is all about moving from a deficit model, i.e. something is wrong, to a collaborative approach that identifies and amplifies potential. It offers an empowering context to mentoring, where we are guiding the mentee's progress by expanding their options, providing the opportunity for self-discovery and positive action. So here's the reference, or here's my go-to book on appreciative coaching. There's probably a lot more out there by now, but this is by Sarah Olem, Jacqueline Binkert, and Anne Clancy, and it's a comprehensive guide and examples. This book, Appreciative Coaching, their process is highly compatible with the mentoring conversation model that we looked at earlier with the 4 questions. So it's slightly different, but you'll see that, you know, you could overlay them. So take a look. I'm going to show it to you briefly, describe it, their model, and you can make the connections for yourself. So mentees generally come to you, or you've worked out some sort of topic or area as a focus for the mentoring. If you're part of a mentoring program, there'll be some aims and objectives overarching. So the first part of appreciative coaching focuses on what they call discovery. So I'll give you some sample questions. I'll be looking to you to, again, share some of your questions here. So in discovery, the purpose is for both mentor and mentee to gain clarity, the mentee's strengths and attributes to build on, and questions will be about their talents and how they've used them in past success. So all the things we've already been talking about here. And here are some sample questions for discovery, similar to what we've talked about. So when you ask these questions, listen to their words, any metaphors they use, hints of values or clues to their priorities and preferences. Remember, you're listening to what is said and also what is unsaid, and you do need to check that out, not assume. So lots of questions there. So here are a few samples. Describe your 3 greatest accomplishments to date. Now, describe your 3 greatest accomplishments to date. People will often, if you ask them a question, they'll come up with one answer and then they'll stop. But if you say, what are your 3 greatest accomplishments? You know, their brain's going a lot further. And the first thing they say is well and good, but then keep prompting the second and the third. And having 3 things there, you will be able to help them identify the patterns of the strengths and the abilities, the capabilities, all of the attributes that brought about those accomplishments. Then taking it deeper, what made these accomplishments stand out for you? What strengths helped you then that you could use now? So these samples, discovery, reflect very much all of those questions that you came up before. So the next phase, and I'll ask for some more examples from you in a moment, is the dream. So the dream phase invites the mentee to speak from the heart about their personal aspirations. Here, we're looking for the context for setting goals and their desired future. We seek the bigger picture of what they want. So you can see why we need to uncover values and priorities early in the process. And we'll keep checking in with them as we question about their desired future. So we're going to ask some questions about the mentee's vision, how that fulfills their values. And we're going to encourage them to imagine possibilities and express their preferred future. So give me some samples of how you go about getting your mentees to dream. So that context for setting goals, finding out about what they desire in the future, getting them to talk about their vision and how it fulfills or matches their values. I'll give you 30 seconds to a minute. What sort of questions do you ask them? Okay, while you're typing in or thinking about that, I'm going to keep moving so we don't run out of time here. I'll just give you some sample questions that I came up with. So it might be something like, ideally, where do you see yourself in the future? They may tell you that, but you follow up. What other possibilities would please you? Remembering, we want them to have more than one alternative. We want them to have options. Our aim is to develop many possibilities. So what other possibilities would please you? And then we ask them, so how does that align with your values of? So by now, you're picking up what their values are, what's important to them. So I see some coming in now. Okay, Monica says, what is your dream job? And you're listening there for values, whether it's something they can aspire to and you work together towards, or whether it's going to remain a dream. You can still draw some practical ideas about what will work for them, and you're finding out more about their values. Thanks. Sue says, if you had a magic wand, what would your future look like? Now, so both these questions are really asking people to use their imagination. It's saying, like, if anything were possible, what do you want? What would please you? What would satisfy you? Okay. So Monica is clarifying, my cohort are young people with intellectual disabilities. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Heather says, at the end of your life, what dream or legacy do you hope had come true? Wow, that's lovely. Jess says, and as I mentioned, this doesn't take place just in one conversation. We're talking about mentoring, which is something which goes forward over time. And these might be questions you get people to go away and think about, give it to them as homework. Even if they come up with an answer or some answers, you can come back to it and say, these are the sorts of questions sometimes you think about after they've been asked. Why did you go away and give it some thought? Maybe, some people like to journal. You might just want to think about it and come back. We can talk more about this next time, be very interested in knowing what you see. Okay. So Jess says, what would you be doing differently if there were nothing holding you back? And Ron says, what was your goal taking that action? Michael says, if there were not barriers and you had all the resources available, what would you pursue? Daniel says, what is the whisper that keeps returning to you? Oh, that's lovely. Thanks, Daniel. Brenda's giving feedback to the group. Great questions. And I hope you're jotting some of these down. And again, you're going to massage them. You're going to reproduce them in your own way and in the way that's appropriate for the people that you are mentoring. Thanks for that. Okay. Now, I'm going through these sections fairly quickly, but I want to remind you the mentoring dynamic, we move back and forth. You need to be prepared to backtrack. The phases aren't mutually exclusive. It's likely that you'll discover more, gain more clarity, adjust the picture as their self-awareness develops. So we're looking at design now. So again, get ready to put some samples up. I'm loving the sharing that's going on here. So in the design phase, we want them to become more specific, and we're going to affirm their potential. We're going to ask some questions about what success looks like, and we're going to narrow down 2 or 3 major priorities to work on, and we're going to link the talents they used in those past successes to the present and future actions. So what sort of questions in that design phase, that kind of planning phase, it's goal setting and planning, what sort of questions do you ask? So a sample here is, about 10 years from now, what do you think you are doing that makes you happy? Okay. See if there's any more sample questions coming in. I'll put mine up in the meantime so we can keep to time here. Yes, we're on time. The sample questions I've got here: how will you know you've succeeded? What will you see or feel or experience? You know, I've asked this question, how will you know, or what does success look like for you? And I've seen people have that aha or that epiphany when they've realized, you know what, I've already got this. And I think that's a good outcome. It doesn't mean they're not going to strive for more of it or that thing in another area of their life. All right, so let's go back and have a look at some of these questions that are coming in. What steps will you need to put in place to achieve this? Great. And so Sue's laying it out. It's not going to happen overnight. It is a step-by-step process. And each step becomes a mini goal in itself. And it becomes a milestone, if you use that language. It becomes a checkpoint on the list. It becomes something you review. How did that go? Did it turn out the way you wanted or not? Okay, how do we adjust to that? And having a number of steps laid out, your question towards the end of the conversation is going to be around, okay, so what's the first step? What's the commitment before we meet next? So you've actually got an action step, an immediate or fairly immediate action step to follow up at your next meeting. Okay, some of my samples. What are the most important areas to work on? How would you use your talent of something you've identified in this context? Okay, Gloria says, what do you wish you could have done? Another sample is, what do you think you should be doing right now to achieve your happiness in the future? Okay, good. What's the first, smallest, easiest action you can take after leaving? Beautiful. This is just what I mentioned without seeing your comment there, Jess. And I also like what Jess has done here. She said it might be, what is the first action? What is the smallest action? What is the easiest action? So if you're starting something big, you may need to break it down. And if you're working with someone, and you know, a lot of people don't have a huge self-confidence, and if you recognize that, giving them options like this, so what's the first step? You might instead say, well, so what's the smallest step? You want to get runs on the board. What's the easiest thing that you can do? And then stay silent and let them review. Hopefully they've written down, you know, they've said A, B, C, and D. These are the steps I need to do. And give them the space then to look at that and say, oh, well, perhaps the easiest thing I could do would be, maybe to review my resume and bring it up to date. Okay. And that might open a little bit more conversation. So what do you need to do to review your resume and bring it up to date? Do you have all the resources you need? Do you have someone who might look at that for you? Do you want me to look at that if you've got some skill in that area? So, you know, That's really nice. Thank you, Jess. What's the first, smallest, easiest? Thank you. All right. So continuing on, so there's really, in a nutshell, the basic model of appreciative conversation. Now, I have to say, so we've talked about discovery, dream, design, and I'm not keen on this word destiny. I mean, it's their model and that they've used it. In earlier versions of Appreciative Inquiry, it was called delivery. And personally, I'd be happier with that because this phase is really, it's not a done deal. You know, I actually don't believe personally in destiny. I don't believe anything is carved in stone. There are all sorts of circumstances outside our control, and there are circumstances within our control. And those things within our control, we need to take the steps and the actions to achieve them. So I'm not keen on that word. Delivery does it for me much better, because really we're talking about experimentation, and we mustn't build up false expectations in our mentee. Not everything they do is going to work or work well. But what we can do, if we've got this attitude of experimentation, we can work with them to help them find out what works, what does work, and do more of that, and find out what doesn't work and stop doing that, or at least do less than that. So kind of as a mental framework, or as a philosophy, if you like, I think that the idea of experimentation is not a bad one. So again, no, I'm going to ask you for some sample questions here. What we're trying to do in this last phase is to expand the mentee's capacity to realize and live in a new reality, because if they start doing something, you know, their world has shifted. It's changed, and we know from trying to change habits, we tend to bounce back into long established habits, but we don't want our mentee to rebound. We want them to keep going, keep expanding, live in this new reality they've created for themselves. So your questions, to encourage experimentation and to recognize changes and provide positive reinforcement, and also to support them through disruption, because even positive change does disrupt the status quo. And we want to build skills for their self-reliance. Okay, so I'm just looking at some other samples coming through. What about now? Do you have any plan or anything in mind you want to do right now to prepare you for what you want to be, any changes you want to do? Okay, good. So I'll just give you some of my sample questions for this phase. This is kind of the follow-up phase. So they've gone away, they've done something differently, they've come back, you're reviewing progress. Question might be, what is changing for you? In what new ways are you thinking and acting? Remember, one of the things we want to do is reinforce positive changes that they actually have made. Give them a positive feedback. Get them to recognize what they're doing differently. What positive results are these bringing? How might you apply your skills to manage? So if they have had a challenge or a setback, or if things haven't worked out so well, okay, it didn't work out so well. Let's go back to your skills and your strengths. How can you use those to manage this challenge or manage this setback? So, and we always talk about it as a setback. It's, you know, okay, their plans have been a bit derailed, but that doesn't stop them getting back on course or doing something different to get a better result. So I have got a little bit more to go here. So where I wanted to talk about the art of asking. So I'm going to be really quick with this because we're 10 minutes away from the top of the hour. And I use this quote quite a lot. Sigmund Freud said, the mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 its bulk above the water. And in mentoring, our questions are about raising the mentee's self-awareness, bringing thoughts and feelings, ideas and aspirations from the deep to the surface. Now, please don't think I'm saying mentors are going to be psychoanalyzing their mentees. Far from it. But I'm just using this concept. What we want them to recognize is what they want. And often that is below the surface. And we want to check out alignment with their values, getting them to talk, as someone said earlier before, why they want it. What is it about that that is important? And I did say before, this question, why, it's what we want to know. It's a question we have in our mind. And we also need to be a little bit careful about using why, because it does sometimes trigger defensiveness and justification. It might focus on their fears, shortcomings, insecurities, can entrench their mindset. So you might want to, you might want to use some alternatives to that. And so instead of why do you want that, it might be, well, what is it that's important for you? Instead of why do you feel that way, they feel that way. Their feelings are their feelings, and just because we don't feel that way doesn't mean anything. A better question might be, what situations cause you to feel that way? Instead of why did you get a bad rating in that review, what might you do to get a better rating? And you need to ask lots of questions without ever seeming like an interrogation, and you need to listen well without judgment so they feel safe to keep talking. So I want to finish up with some techniques that make that easier. And the first technique I want to talk about is cushions. And see my little sofa daybed there, plumped up with lovely soft cushions. I've got one not dissimilar to this on my deck outside, and it's a lovely space to get comfy with a book or a magazine and a rug and keep warm and enjoy life. So the idea is a cushion, because if you took all the cushions off that daybed, it'd be pretty uncomfortable. So the idea with cushions is to soften your questions, especially confronting questions. So you can combine your phrases, so your words, preface a confronting question, and you combine that with rapport building, non-verbal communication. So your attitude is always a respectful curiosity, and you convey that with your body language and your tone of voice. So phrases you might use might be, do you mind if I ask? And if you're genuinely asking someone, do you mind if I ask, with the appropriate non-verbal body language and tone of voice, you're softening, you're cushioning your next question. They can always say, well, actually, I do mind and I don't want to talk about that. That's up to them. A different phrase might be, I'm wondering, and then you ask your question, or would you like to tell me, that story about how you succeed, blah, blah, blah. So they're just three. You'll have your own. You can create more. So the next technique is probing. So you want to get people to talk more. So again, it's a little bit like the cushions, but it's actually more directed. Can you say a little more about whatever it was they stuck? Would you expand on that? Perhaps you'd like to tell me how, and so on. So little phrases that you can use to get them talking some more once they do start to open up. And then summarizing. Now, this is where you are checking your understanding. Remember, we can never assume we know. And summarizing is simply a way of feeding back and checking in with them, that and not only checking in that we understand, but checking in that what they said is what they meant. So sometimes it takes a couple of goes. So what you're saying is, and then you paraphrase. Now, you don't have to just parrot back what they said, but selectively use words that they used, but succinctly feed back your understanding of what they said. What I'm hearing is, or from your point of view, it seems that this gives them the opportunity to correct if you've got it wrong, or to clarify if actually they meant something different. It might have been what they said, but it wasn't actually what you meant. So I'm going to finish up now with, we've covered the why questions are critical, the key questions, those 4 fundamentals, some more you can do with questions, and a little bit about the art of asking. But I'm going to give you a little checklist now. You can choose from this if you want to put any of this on your action plan. My recommendation is, if you want to improve your skills in this area of asking good questions, first of all, set your own intention in all your conversations, not just mentoring conversations. Aim to build the habits. Stephen Covey, you remember Stephen Covey from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, another classic. His first habit he recommends is seek first to understand. So in all of your conversations, what we're trying to do is ask questions so that you understand where they're coming from, instead of immediately, like a ping pong ball that we hit back and forth. Instead of a conversation being like that, we catch the ball and we ask a question about that. What is it? So set your intention in all your conversations and watch your relationships improve. Build your repertoire of questions. I think this webinar has been great in the amount of input we've had from people on the live webinar who have contributed their samples. So I hope you've got most of those jotted down for yourself. So build your own repertoire of questions, rephrase or reinvent some of the samples, in my books or that you've heard today. Build a new habit. Catch yourself about to give advice, even when it's asked for. Catch yourself, just restrain yourself and ask a question instead. And practice. With any skill or change of habit, it's going to feel awkward and hard at first. We slip back into those old patterns. The antidote is to persist until a new way becomes the default, second nature, and easy. So those are my recommendations to add to your list. The other thing you could do is make it a point to notice and acknowledge good questions. Notice the results when you use more questions yourself. Give yourself a mental pat on the back. And when other people ask you a question, give them some positive feedback. Thank you for asking. Or that's a good question. Or now that's a question that makes me think. Or that's a question I need to really think about. Thanks. Or I'm not sure the answer to that question. Maybe, let's talk some more about that. So I do hope that this has raised some questions for you, and I hope you've got some key takeaways. I would love to hear your key takeaways and your action plans. So if you'd like to share those, please type them in now. I'll come back and have a look in just a moment. Just a reminder, and I'll stick around for questions. We're just a couple of minutes away from the top of the hour, but I will stick around as long as questions come in. If you have some, please ask. We have 4 more webinars this year. Gosh, the year's getting away. So risk management is our next webinar next month, and you can watch the recordings, but I promise you the live webinar is far more engaging and interesting to be involved with. So if you can get along, please do. But if you really can't, then the recordings are up about within 24 hours usually. So we've still got some good topics to cover this year. And remembering that all of the topics in the webinars this year are from my book, Advanced Mentoring Skills, Taking Your Conversations to the Next Level, which comes with access to 12 video masterclasses and is available in most countries of the world. So if you're on the live webinar, stick around. I'm going to stick around to hear from you, your actions, your takeaways, and also respond to any questions. If you are watching the recording, thanks for watching, and hope to see you soon on a live webinar. Why don't you go on the website and sign up for your invitation? Thanks very much. Okay.